Welcome back to Cards and Comics, and today I am doing a different video than I normally ever do, and this is kind of the first in a series I want to start. Having an opinion about the hobby is important. I feel like I have done a lot of videos, but I haven't really talked too much outside of a few bits and pieces there about, the hobby and where I think it's going and sort of just my thoughts on certain key issues. And this topic that I'm going to talk about today has been something I've been thinking about a long time, because as a collector and as someone who's been in since, really 1986 is when I really started. I've seen a lot of things over the years, and I feel like this is a time to talk about, because a lot of people are talking about the hobby and what's going on. And this interview with the Card Ladder team on Sports Card Anonymous really brought out some feelings in me about things that I been thinking about a while. Now, before I start the video, I will say is I have tried to get more professional YouTube, so I've got a mic now. Hopefully this sounds better. I'm trying to do some dramatic mood lighting to increase my fan base by tenfold. We'll see if that works, if that ploy pays off. If not, then I've got some fun new toys to play with in the man cave. But I wanted to just say this is kind of the first in the series, and tell me if you guys like it. If not, then I'll continue to do my other content just as I am. So on to this topic. So I'm going to play this clip here from this interview with Card Ladder and his team, and with Dakota, Sports Card Anonymous, and we'll just go right into it.
You talked about Michael Saylor and how he invested in NFTs because he said there was scholarly content out there. There was scholarship there. I mean, but we still have big names invested in the sports cards during this time too. Patrick Bet-David, the person you just named that had him on this podcast. He bought the two Gretzkys, famously. I mean, can the argument be made that we don't need to change our content? It's just that this asset class, or this collectible doesn't appeal to Michael Saylor, and that's why he didn't end up here.
The argument could be made that content is not responsible, or the argument could be made that content is not going to bring in more people, that it doesn't matter what our content looks like. And the argument could be made that our content is not repelling people. Although I think that's a pretty ludicrous argument. I think ask any person of a moderately conservative nature to look into sports card investing, Google that phrase, and see if the content that turns up appeals to them and presents sports cards in a scholarly light that would be appealing to a more conservative-oriented, careful investor. And I think the answer is going to be a resounding no. This content feels more like a multi-level marketing pitch about get rich quick on commodity base cards than it feels like a serious scholarly academic approach. So I think if one were to say, look, the content doesn't matter, okay, we can have that argument. But what can't be said is that our industry is not in a backslide right now, because it is. It certainly is. No matter which metrics we'd like to look at, in the aggregate, spending is down in terms of daily transaction volume and in terms of prices. And to me, one of the culprits is the fact that we have a content menu in the most visible places that is not appealing to the next layer of people that we'd like to appeal to, which is more, people who are a little bit more reserved, people who are a little bit more skeptical by nature, people who need to see more than a couple of hype videos and a couple of hype social media posts before they decide that this is a category that they'd like to allocate money to.
With no metrics or details, how he thinks content creators and the poor, uneducated content is turning off investors. And he gives an example of one investor who bought Bitcoin instead of cards without any real idea if the person even considered buying cards to begin with as an investment. But you have this kind of, I would say, kind of silly premise that content creators are one of the reasons for the downturn in the sports card collectible market right now. And I feel like it's such a reach. And the reason why I'm actually even bringing this up is because it gets me to what I really want to talk about is real issues in the hobby that never get addressed and are brought up, multiple times. And if anyone really wants to talk about these issues, which doesn't really appear to be at the higher levels, right? And the one thing that Chris talks about also in the video is about this idea of a referendum on content creators and who's the face of the hobby. I think that's just another silly idea as well, because there can never be a face of a hobby. There can never be this idea that this person or this type of content is the best content, because like anything else in the world, one type of content appeals to one person, another type appeals to another. The idea, though, that bad content or uneducated content or non-graphical or chart content is going to really drive off the investors, and that we're talking about multi-level marketing as a way to pitch cards is just also very silly, because again, there's thousands of videos on YouTube talking about how base cards were overvalued. There's video after video talking about how rarity is key, how vintage card market sustains the pressures of these ups and downs. And, I've said early on in my video that there was a huge, gain in card values in 2018, and especially in the vintage rookie card market. That's very similar to what's happened in 2020, right? And the fact that this 2020 pandemic issue, where you had kind of a perfect storm to create, a lot of this content, or a lot of this, this increase in value of cards and other collectibles outside of cards, because I do a lot of comic books too, and they went up a lot as well. And now you've got this kind of, I call it like flavor of the week mentality, where every week you've got sports cards and you've got comic books and WWE. You've got a lot of things going up in value and then dropping very quickly, because people realize, like, hey, there is, there is some, let's say hidden value for some of the stuff. As I plug my computer in so we don't lose power. There we go. But we've got all this content creation around all these issues, because things are moving at a very fast pace, right? So he doesn't like the fact that, we're talking about all these issues in real time. He wants it to be some sort of like steady, like investor base, like get people into the hobby, invest in these blue chip stocks of cards, and that cards are an asset. And you hear a lot of people that have a lot more knowledge in this area around what an asset really is. And the fact that cards themselves are not great assets because they're not very liquid, right? So we're just going to leave it there. They're not great investments. I mean, in terms of liquidity, one of the guys I really respect, Rudy from the Magic the Gathering side, he talks about that quite a bit about Magic cards, and he's heavily invested in Magic cards. He'll tell you in a lot of his videos that they're not liquid, they're not assets in the general sense of the word of what an asset really is. And so therefore, they're not what these investors are going to look for anyway. They're what is termed as kind of like, very similar to what gold and silver is. They're kind of like hedges on inflation, other issues that happen in the economic world, but they're not what people are going to invest, a majority of their money into, right? If they're going to really get into investing, right? So that's the first thing, but I want to get to the real issues here that never get really talked about and sort of the point of, what I'm talking about today is that the hobby itself, the reason why it hasn't taken off with a lot of these investors and these people who speculate and dabble in these areas, right, is because we've never corrected the issues that this hobby's had since the 70s and 80s, right? We've never gotten rid of scammers, trimmers, people who, shill bid auctions and auction houses who allow their employees to bid in their own auctions, and I mean just over and over and over, right? All these issues, right? And that is the real reason that people aren't heavily invested in this hobby. It's unregulated. It has no rules. There can be grading, for example, has no rules, right? It's an opinion. So to sit there and say an asset and a PSA holder, an SGC holder, and believe me, guys, I mean, look, I'm gonna just pull whatever card I got laying around here. I'm invested like everyone else. I've got cards graded by every company out there. Okay, guys, I'm not sitting here saying like I'm bashing SGC, I'm bashing PSA. Okay, I'm saying that all these guys have an opinion, right? And really only PSA has some sort of money guarantee that they actually set money back for, but it doesn't matter because again, they say on their website it's just an opinion. So this isn't you're not going to have a Federal Reserve come in and save your butt if car collectibles go under, right? It's unregulated. It has no rules. No one really cares if you get ripped off. That's another thing. No one cares that you went out and bought something that wasn't a real autograph. 2 or 3 years later, no one cares. You're not going to get any prosecutor or anybody at a police station really to pay attention to you, right? And that is why people aren't all in on this. That's why this is a side hustle. This is why, for a lot of people who can make a living doing this, but very few people have become billionaires collecting cards, right? Because again, the way that it's regulated, the way it's policed, and the thing is that what's happened in the hobby is that we've had to self-police ourselves, right? So the thing I want to impress upon you guys is this: is that and the other video I was going to look at, I was going to talk about a little bit is, Neo talking about educate yourself before you buy comic books or cards. And in this example, he talks about how they reprinted Ultimate Fallout 4 in a very similar looking book. And Marvel made it very difficult to tell the two apart. You had to really know some details and facts, right? What I'm going to say, guys, is that education and getting yourself knowledgeable about the hobby has never really been about knowing a lot about the collectibles themselves. Yes, that's a side benefit. The number one reason why you educated yourself in this hobby was to prevent getting scammed and ripped off. And that is the overwhelming arch and theme of this hobby is every day, every transaction, every time you go to a card show, every time you do something on eBay, you could get ripped off. In every transaction you do in this hobby, you could get ripped off. And that is something that just doesn't allow for people to say, look, this is something I want to invest heavily in. If I can get ripped off buying a Michael Jordan rookie card, or I can get ripped off buying a modern rookie, whatever it is, everything from a T206 card down to the most modern of basketball card, I could get ripped off. And that is why things have never been fixed. We've never fixed anything in this hobby. If you go back historically, and I'm not going to go through every issue because you can Google it and look them all up, but Operation Bullpen, right? The FBI investigation into fake autographs. And, this is on FBI's own website. But you go to the bottom here, guys, and they talk about accomplishment and statistics, okay? 63 charges, convictions, seizures of $4.9 million in income, homes and accounts and jewelry, 18 forgery rings were dismantled and 300,000 in restitution paid. 1,000 victims and counting, right? 15.25 $1 million in economic loss prevention, yada yada, right? And a lot of people think this is just the tip of the iceberg. Like there was a lot more that they just couldn't catch, but this is just one thing, right? This happened a long time ago. It started in 2000, right? These kind of things have reformed. There's more people doing these kind of things than I think than there's ever been because you heard from the trimming scandal from PSA on Blowout. The people that are trimming cards today are the same people trimming cards in the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s. The same people. They get caught. PSA knows who they are. Nothing ever happens. And I talk about self-policing, it goes down to stuff like this, okay? Websites like, I just Googled for 5 minutes and found Baseball Card Emporium has a site about not getting ripped off on Craigslist and the Craigslist scam in great detail. Look at all this detail about what cards, methods of detection, the different flips, and just on and on. Okay, and this is just a collector helping everyone out and creating content on the websites out there, on the web, to help other collectors out because they don't want them to be ripped off. Who else is doing that besides other collectors, right? No one is really helping each other except for collector to collector. However, the guys like Ken Golden, the OGs, the OG scammers are still in the hobby. A lot of the people who, manufactured fake cards, like, When It Was a Game, which I did a video on if you want to check out, they're still selling cards under the name San Diego Cards. They're on eBay. They have thousands and thousands and thousands of transactions on eBay. And they were convicted in court of selling fake PSA cards. Still selling cards on eBay. That happens. This is why the hobby can never get past itself. It's because it never fixes anything that's ever happened in the past. Never. Everything is still there. Every scam, everything that's been done pretty much never gets resolved and fixed. And then 2 years, 5 years, 10 years later, King Golden becomes an OG made guy in the hobby. 10 years later, San Diego Collectibles is selling PSA cards on eBay after being convicted of faking cards and slabs. Never goes away. So, I want to leave you guys with some stories, okay? Being in the hobby for this many years, the one thing I want to say is I had 2 incidences that really shaped my collecting focus, or my collecting, I'd say my awareness of how the hobby works, right? The first one was, when I was a kid, I was still in high school, and I traded I was at a card show. I traded a dealer for a card, and I said I need to call my dad, because it was kind of, we were in this together, and I want to make sure it's a good deal. Will you be okay if I go and do that? And the guy's like, yeah. I called my dad. I was like, don't do the trade. It's bad. Don't do it. So I go back to the dealer. I said, my dad said don't do the trade. And he's like, well, you've already left my table with my card, so the trade's done, and I'm not giving your card back. And and that's how it was. And and the other, I think I've said it a few times on my channel, but when I went out and I traded for a 79 Peachy Gretzky that was fake, and I had to have the help of a show promoter, had to threaten the guy with calling the police and a bunch of other things to get part of my money and cards back. And then when I talked to a dealer, a very good friend of mine, about the incident, and he just looked at me and said, you had no business buying a 79 Peachy Gretzky. You didn't know enough about it. You deserve to get ripped off. And I was like, taken aback. I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, look, in this hobby, dealers make their most money by taking advantage of the most undereducated collectors. That's how dealers make all their money. They take advantage of people who don't know enough about what they're buying. And in that case, that dealer took advantage of you because he knew you didn't know enough about that card to spot a fake, and he went ahead and tried to hose you to the max. And that dealer, the thing that was funny about it was, I realized when I got home, I posted the card on PSA's website, on their forums. Within minutes, people were texting me or, messaging me back on PSA's forum saying the card's fake. It's got all these telltale signs of a fake. Here's how you tell it's a fake. I went back to the show the next day. The guy's gone. 2-day show. The guy didn't show up second day. And then I had to really convince the dealers and the promoter it was fake. But we finally got my money back, so I was able to get some restitution there. But it's and then to be told by a friend of mine who's a dealer that, yeah, you deserve to get ripped off. You didn't know enough about what you were doing, and that's what happens to you. That's what happens to you in this hobby if you don't know what you're doing. You get ripped off. And then I went to another dealer, and I just talking about cards and grading, and the guy's like, if I don't get this card in a better holder. Someone else will, and I need this money to feed my family. So trimming cards, altering cards is what every dealer does, because it's a business and they have to get the cards in the best holder, because that's how they make their money. And for people who are just collectors, they don't understand how sometimes those pressures of making the amount of money necessary to feed their family or to sustain a business, impacts their judgment and their ability to make decisions. And I said, basically, like, so you guys trim cards? And the guy's like, well, we do whatever it takes to get the card in the right holder, is what he told me. And that is the hobby. And that's what we have to deal with. That's what we have to live with. As Joe Orlando put it, it's just an opinion. It's not a science. The method of grading is not scientific. They're not going to catch everything, and that's just how it is. And so that level of uncertainty, right? So if you go into risk management, this level of uncertainty and probability, right? It's very high in this hobby. That if you are in it long enough, the probability of you getting ripped off is almost 100% in this hobby. But the odds that, let's say, if you collect vintage, that you have trim cards in your collection is very high. The odds that you have something modern that's been trimmed is very high if you collect a certain players like Mike Trout, Tom Brady. That it's just a fact. You can go on blowout forums and look at all the threads and make your own conclusions, but it's there, guys. And so I'm not trying to be doom and gloom, but when someone posts a video about how content creators are not doing enough in this hobby to promote cards to make them grow in value, my counterpoint to that is we're not doing enough in the hobby to prevent all the bullshit that prevents the hobby from growing from happening. Tisking and pointing your finger at these content creators for not, talking about things as assets and how we should be blindly investing in these cards because, they're the next great, asset to own. That's dumb, because we haven't fixed the underlying issues that cause people to lose confidence in this hobby, and it causes people to quit collecting and give it up because they get ripped off once and they just never come back. So that's what I want to talk about. And that's what I really wanted to bring up is, look, Chris from Card Ladder, Dakota, I think Dakota asked some nice questions, but, it's not about us as content creators, shilling for the hobby and saying, and being cheerleaders and just blindly saying buy everything because everything's great. What we should be critical about is we should be trying to protect each other, because if we don't protect each other, no one else will. There's no regulation. Secondly is not everything is investable as it is. Even if the hobby was some kind of great asset to be invested in, not everything is worthy of that level of financial investment. And the fact that there's all these underlying issues, right? I'll just bring up another one, right? Like Golden, right? I talked about him being the OG scammer, but, when I talk about comps, people just throw out Golden as, an outlier. They're like, well, we can't even look at his comps because they're so bad. They're so high. And before that, Memory Lane was that person, right? In the old days, back in the early 2000s, it was always like, oh, that's a Memory Lane auction. We can't really use that. And, because Memory Lane just would always have record prices every month for cards that were very common, right? So those things, are very, very troubling to the hobby. So, what I would tell everyone is, do as much research as possible, protect yourself, but be eyes wide open. Don't think that, you can't ever get ripped off or scammed, because people are out there working really hard to try to scam us all and rip us off, and we have to be diligent and we have to work together, and that's how we protect ourselves. If we as hobbyists, as collectors, do as much to work together as much as possible to prevent this, a lot of this stuff can be fixed. It can't be perfect, it'll never be perfect, but we can do better in that way. So when he says we need to do better as content creators, I say we need to do better as collectors, as hobbyists, to protect each other, to give each other the right amount of knowledge, but also don't take advantage of each other and deals and how we treat each other. Because one of my pet peeves is when people say, I stole this card, I stole that card, I got into a deal and I stole this from someone. if that's your mentality, that you're here to rip people off and steal cards from them and from uneducated people, then the hobby this is not really the place for you if that's your mentality, in my opinion. So, I think we can do better in those areas. I think the hobby itself has a lot of things to clean up. And until we get there, we're never going to be considered as a serious asset for these kind of investors. So that's my piece. I'll be doing this hopefully a couple times a week. If you like it, let me know. If you don't like it, like I said, I'll go back to my old content because, it is what it is. I have a certain niche in the hobby and I do what I do. Hopefully you guys like it. If you don't, hey, it is what it is. So, but let me know in the comments. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time on Cards and Comics. Bye.